Okay. Well, welcome back, everybody, and good. Happy New Year. So go nice and easy. The first one back after a break is just give yourself time to settle in, both physically and mentally, really. And I think this is one of the key things that we're always we lose some of that clarity as well as some of the kind of physical conditioning. So nice and easy. We'll start our usual warm up, rubbing our hands together and tapping over the face. And then over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. The side. Gently on your belly. And your legs. Good. Okay. Let's sit back, have your feet out. Take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. And see if you can just remember that quietness, that stillness, however you think about it, whatever the sensation is for you. That is so characteristic of the practices, this sort of feeling that we get from doing Tai Chi. Think about what's involved in that. We want to, of course, let our body settle, let our weight drop. But also just trying to keep a gentle focus of attention on, in the first instance, on just our posture and general things, but within the body. And after a period like, particularly over Christmas, you get to a point where you tend to forget what day it is, don't you? That kind of clarity slips a little bit. It will come back, but to start off with, you might find it a little bit more difficult. And remember, it's a gentle process. You're sort of nudging your thoughts. Maybe used the example in the past with you that it's a bit like a dog herding sheep. The dog sort of chivies the sheep to a greener field or a better place. That don't hurt the sheep and round them up. Every now and then there's a stray sheep that goes out, and one of the dogs will go out and herd it back in, and so on and so forth. So it's the same thing. You'll sit here and you'll think about something, you'll get distracted, and it's that process of bringing your attention back that I think is really a key to developing in this art. And there's plenty to think about. You can notice your weight sinking into the chair, notice the effect that has on your chest, your breathing, your shoulders, so on and so forth. So body and mind very much working in tandem, one unit. And then bringing your feet in. I think for all that Tai Chi is obviously a very physical art, I think that element of the mind and the focusing of the mind really remains one of the key tools that we have. The more we can bring our attention into focus, the more we progress our practice in my experience. So it's not to be overlooked and not to be seen as a kind of side effect, but it's very, very much a part of the practice. So same again, letting your hips sink. And this time, as your hips sink, really notice the effect on the upper part of your body. We tend to sit sort of stiff and tight. And there's this sense of almost a kind of flopping down. Some of your weight going into your feet, of course. And as your shoulders drop, your rib cage drops. So we become aware of this stronger feeling, like a column going up within the body. And this again is very difficult, like those sort of like errant thoughts. We very easily slip back into this tight mode because that's the habit that we carry with us. And because this can feel quite uncomfortable at times, quite awkward at times. You feel as though you're slouching, you feel as though it's untidy, it's not what you're supposed to do. So all of those things are barriers in a way to developing the art, and all of those things are transcended by this return of our attention to the body as it is really. So then turning your head with a nice smooth movement, a nice massaging movement. Just see how far you can go before you hit that barrier, that point where muscles begin to tighten just a little bit. Remember, this is not a competition, and it's important that you don't force through that barrier. You want the barrier to dissolve away, to be eroded away, maybe to be kind of penetrated, but it shouldn't be a strain. And then your shoulders. I've even heard it said by some people that you shouldn't actually sweat while you're doing Tai Chi, and they take it to that kind of level. And I think that's quite difficult for us to really appreciate if we think of Tai Chi purely as an exercise form. And then going forwards. So have you still got that focus of attention, or have your thoughts drifted off? And it doesn't really matter where they've drifted to, you want them to come back. And then hand down to your side and out a little bit, and imagine the round pillars or the curving line, and then coming around and back. You're not swinging your arms forward, you're not pushing your arms forwards or backwards. It feels like the movement in the ribs. If I exaggerate, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, if I do this, if I stick my chest out, that pushes my arms back. If I draw my chest in, that brings my arms forwards. So, I mean, this is obviously throwing my posture out, it's more subtle than that, but that's the connection that you want to make. And this is something that we'll come back to, of course, later in the class. So now the focus of your attention becomes a little bit sharper, rather than just a general, oh, this is how the body feels, which is fine, that's our starting point. But now we're looking to really feel and to notice the pathways, the connections in the body, and the sense of the flow of the movement. Back the other way. So it's a kind of focusing inwards of our attention. And again, that is of course quite hard. and then easing forwards and pushing back. So something I noticed with some of the exercises that I do in my own practice, some of them involve kind of stand on one leg and leaning out and so on and so forth. And a decisive, or I would say the decisive factor in that makes the difference between remaining upright or falling over, which I do quite frequently as it happens. And I mean, not in any kind of bad way, or sort of stumbling and things like that. But if I can bring my attention to the sole of my foot, then that sorts the problem. And that's interesting enough, because I've trained myself to do that. So the focus of your attention is one of the most practical things you can do. Feeling your weight moving in increments. You're about here. You've got about 60% of your weight forwards. You go back to about 50-50 between the feet and the hips, and then more like 60 back in the hips, and then you go forwards again. Training yourself to recognize these changes within your body. And eventually the recognition of the sensation and the actual physical movement become inseparable. This is what we call intent in Tai Chi. There's an intent to move forward, an intent to move back. Not thought. You're not thinking, now it's time for me to move forward. It's more subtle than that. A thought takes too long to think before you do it. But intent is a much more subconscious thing. Turn a little. And then in the other direction. So we were just talking about jigsaw puzzles, and what we're doing now is going through the sort of the pieces of the jigsaw that constitute Tai Chi, and then going around. Turning in the center of your body, so hips to waist, that area, not twisting in the middle of your back or your shoulders. But maintaining a nice smooth quality, a kind of swirling feel, almost like you are sort of swirling water around in a glass. And then back the other way. Coming back to the upright position. A little rotation of your hip, just pulling your knee up, step forwards, heel, toes, push gently into the floor, then raise your toes. Bring your foot back. The rotation in your hip that raises your heel should also give you a sense of almost pushing down through the back of your hip, which kind of settles you into the chair. And then on the other side. And remember, it's quite strong around the thighs, around the hips. So go carefully. Good. Sit back. Take a few breaths. Just settle in again. Remember, maybe 2/3 of your weight back in your hips. 60, 70%. Put a little bit of support too from your feet, and really feel that that's helping to keep you in an upright position without strain, without stiffening that would often associate with being upright. It can feel very odd because it feels as though something is missing. Well, something is missing. What's missing is the tightness, tension. It's nothing that we need. Then hands down to your sides again, and this time same movement as we did before, that winding movement, but now with the transfer of your weight. So the combination, moving the hands so that here your hands are very slightly behind your hips. You shouldn't feel any kind of tightening across. You're not pulling your arms back, you're rolling them back. And here, as your hands come forwards, the fingers should be pointing down towards your toes. And it's one movement. It's not your weight moving and it's opening and closing in your chest and your arms rotating. They're all parts of the same movement. So your whole body, your whole mind working as one unit. And that helps with this sense of gathering in that I described, this sense of focusing, because if in our body we feel more connected and more as one unit, then our minds are going to feel like that as well. And this time change to fisherman cast the net. Your hands swing about the same distance as with the previous exercise. I suppose the one difference would be that at the end here, what happens is the fingers just swing out a little bit. So this is straight, not pointing downwards. There isn't a bend in the wrist. But your hands don't really go any further forwards. They will go up a bit because of the natural swing. Imagine doing this in water so that there's a sense of resistance that builds up, and notice your body's response to that. This is another area of mind-body integration in Tai Chi, is that we really build our sensitivity, our physical sensitivity to imagery. And then this time changing, imagine the ball between your arms and your body. As you come back, your hands just pulled over. My hands are still slightly below shoulder height. What happens is you're pulling your arms like you're pulling a stick out the ground, and then your elbows drop, and that just brings your wrists and your fingers up a little bit. So again, get away from the idea that we're trying to lift our arms here. We're not. And then pigeon spreads its wings. So your hands don't go behind the shoulders at all, nor do your elbows. But expanding and contracting. Nice, smooth, steady rhythm. That massaging quality. Very good exercise, this, if we do it properly, for our chest and lungs and breathing. And then pushing the wave here, it's the elbows that go out, the fingers just point in slightly, then you turn them palm forwards. As you go forwards, you bring your elbows back, and that gives you the straight push forwards. And your hands can curve up a little bit, roughly in front of your hips to in front of your shoulders, that kind of range. Once more. Coming back, rolling your hands into a hollow fist. Here, rather than your elbows going out, there's a rotation. So it's not so much travel forwards and backwards for this one as with the previous couple of exercises. You don't want your elbows back here because you lose the connection from the shoulder to your elbow to your wrist. And you don't want them out here for very similar reasons. It's not like the push, it's a straighter movement. But still, with the rotation, we get that slight sense of an opening and closing here. And eventually, of course, those sort of sensations, whatever we notice, like the chest opening and closing, become the primary movements. Do one more. And then going back to rooting down, sink back, and then just draw your arms out and press together, and then pushing a wave, settling into the hips, push forwards, and punch with both fists. So look at the sequence, and it's an interesting sequence, this one, because each exercise bears a lot of similarities to the other two, and yet there are at the same time very interesting, very subtle differences. do one more round of this. And then start open your fingers, turn your hands all the way out. Be careful here, it can be quite tight, so just as far as you're comfortable, and wind it back. This time the winding movement brings your hands up. You get to here, come around, your fingers hanging down, drop right down, but notice that as you turn your hands in, they just come up over your legs, and you can start again. Good. Now, come back. Bring your hands in. Now it's a simultaneous push from hips and from feet. So you're going to stand up, but instead, just enough energy to push your hands up and let them lower. Feel the, in a sense, the density of your body building between legs and feet. So that becomes part of the energy, the movement. It's like you've dropped into a trampoline and you're waiting for the trampoline to push you back up. Now change to the wild goose. One more time. And part in the clouds. And then dragon plucks the stars from the sky, extending. And now the push down more noticeable on that side that's extending. Push down through your feet and your hips across. Don't strain to get the arm up. Build the movement, moment by moment. So like millimeter by millimeter, build the push down through the feet. The hips will still stopping, so then there's a response from the leg pushing up to your ribs, to the side of the belly, to the solar plexus and the ribs, and then draining away again onto the next foot. The dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Following the movement still, your foot up through your leg to your hip, hip up the side of your body towards your rib cage and your shoulder. And finally, the arm exhale. Now bring both hands in, pushing two directions, not too far. Feel the lengthening through your spine. There's somebody who will very gently massaging your back, alternating between the push up and the push out. When you push out, again, the hands don't go behind your shoulders. That's very important because you don't want to pull on the big muscles in the chest, the pectoral muscles. So here, it will be more like your little finger in line with the shoulder itself. And then we can start to add the turning movement. So it's come in the middle, turn in both directions, becomes pushing in four directions. Simply through an adjustment made in our hips and our waist. So it really brings your attention to the center of your body. Notice the connections from that middle part of your body. It will go to really all parts of the body, feet, soles of your feet, hips, so on and so forth, even when it's just on a recording like this in a way. Still, we want to keep that sense of presence so that we notice those connections, realize the significance of the center of the body. But now we're going to change, scooping the sea, looking at the sky, and still aware of the center part of your body because it's the tilting forwards in your pelvis that takes you forwards, but the pull back through your hips stops you from falling out of the chair and brings you back, brings your arms back, brings your head back, not a strain in your shoulders. And then we change when somebody feels like the opposite movement, grasping the tiger's ears. It's a projection upwards, and there's various ways that we can think of this. But think about what I said earlier: this where the idea and the movement meet, this sense of intent, which can obviously build more if you're familiar with the exercises. Soften your shoulders. It's quite a tricky movement because you're actually following the curve around. And if you think about it, if I exaggerate, watch my hands here. I've got that same movement that we do earlier in the class, and here they're rotated, but I push up a little bit, and that sends my hands up. Now, switch sides. Again, connections from the middle part of your body, the lower down chin, to your fingertips, the crown of your head, to your toes, all working as one unit. And then hands fisted. So notice again that rotation. There's a slight push up from your hips. More than anything else, there's the idea, the intent behind the movement. What point at which what happens in body and what happens in mind are not separate. It's one movement, one holistic movement. One more time. And bring your feet back. Just to expand on that a little bit, one of the early exercises we do is this. So if I turn around, it's slightly awkward like this, but okay. So if my arm's there, if you watch, if I rotate my shoulder, that happens. See how my hands move back, come back. If I rotate forwards, it's that. And I realize that the big pectoral muscles here in the chest, the trapezius in the back, are very much a part of that movement there. Really the main muscles involved in it. If I then go forwards, this happens. I move my weight. So that moves my hands forwards. We can also do this and get that same sense of chest and upper back opening and closing. This is why I always try and encourage people not to do this, because in the move from here to here, it'll become a movement of your arm and your shoulder, and you'll lose the sense of connection. The quality of the movement should change. But when I go to do grasping the tiger's ears, watch. I fist my hand. So I've got that movement. And I have an idea that there's an upward movement here. So it's almost like, again, I'll exaggerate, see if I can get this going. Here, watch my head. I push from my hips and I go like that, almost like I'm trying to push into something with my head, and my back lengthens, and that changes the direction of the movement slightly, because there's that lengthening there, there's a pull up through the shoulders, and that sends the arm over there. And so we're not getting here and trying to, if you try and do this without doing that, what will happen is your hand will come around, and round about here you'll get stuck, because you'll be trying to turn the arm and take it through a corner, and everything will stiffen up. It won't feel at all natural. So you'll know when you're doing it wrong. Now, come back to sitting. Let your hips sink down. You can do an exercise. Some of you may have done this with me at some point in the past. It's called the archer. So it's very much works on the upper part of the body, and we get that same opening and closing in the chest. Go nice and easy with this. Hold your hands over your chest. I'm going to start with my right hand, so you start with your left. You push the hand out to the side, and you draw back with the opposite hand, as though you're drawing a bow, like a bow and arrow. And you can either have the elbow out to the side here, or tuck it behind. There's lots of variations on this. I prefer that personally, but I'll leave it up to you. And then the extended hand swings around as far as you can get over to the other side, and then everything comes back to the middle, and you start again on the other side, drawing the bow, and releasing the arrow. Once again, with the extended arm, it shouldn't go behind the shoulder. Obviously here, the elbow tucks under and behind a little bit if you're doing it this way. But you know, the real pull is here. This just actually gives an extra opening in the chest, approaching a sort of stretch, but only approaching it, not actually stretching. You can feel that opening there. And then, if you're comfortable with this, as the hand pushes out, turn your head and look at the hand and watch it as it comes back over. And the other hand comes up. Now your sight picks up your left hand and you go out the other way, drawing the bow and releasing the arrow. Make sure you're not tightening up in your back or your shoulders. So your weight's still sinking down, feet and hips supporting your upper body, because it's surprisingly strong. Really, really do not force this movement. It would be dangerous to do that. It's a very simple movement, but if you get to here and then you do this, then you're going to damage yourself. So very aware of the limits of the movement, wanting, of course, for those to extend in the way that we do in Tai Chi, but not pushing hard through them. One more on each side. This is the archer. It's very good for chest and lungs. And then your hands back. I remember many years ago, I was asked to do a session for a senior citizens lunch club in Cambridge. I went along. It was quite a packed hall, and I did the archer with them. And I was standing at the front, and I turned around for a while. I had my back to the class. It was a standing class, and I heard this crack. It was like a piece of wood being snapped. And a kind of yelping cry from the back. And I thought, goodness me, what's happened? And I didn't sort of turn around. I just thought, well, if somebody's died, they'll let me know. Well, nobody said anything. So I thought, okay, nothing happened. After the class, somebody came up to me and she said, do you know, she said, I had a frozen shoulder. And this exercise released the frozen shoulder. When you consider that if you talk to a physiotherapist or somebody with those sort of skills, they'll tell you there's nothing you can do for a frozen shoulder. There isn't a method of getting rid of a frozen shoulder. You keep working with it, and sooner or later it just goes. This exercise actively released her frozen shoulder. If it can do that, that's an indication of how powerful that exercise is. That's why it's very, very important. If you get to here and you're tight, if you try and go any further, there's all sorts of nasty things can happen there. So it's a very common exercise. It's a very simple exercise, but I think people don't always appreciate just how strong it is. But it's quite a nice exercise. So that's the archer. Now one that we're a bit more familiar with. So going into the wild goose first of all. With the wild goose, when the hands come down, they're about level with the hips. When they go up, maybe as high as the shoulders or thereabouts. But we're going to go into wind blows the willows. So this time, let your hands drop all the way down. And as they push out, move forwards into one leg and turn. Again, a tricky movement of transfer of your weight and the turning. Need to be done very carefully and gently, then in the other direction. So wind blows the willows. And remember at the beginning of the class where we did the stepping and I said raising your knee should actually cause, it's a rotation in your hip, which causes a sort of dropping down in the back of the hip. So you can do that here. If you go into this leg, it's this leg that raises, so your heel comes up and then goes down again, and then on the opposite side. So it's important that you've moved the weight, of course. Don't turn too far. Look how far I'm not turning. Watch what I'm doing. Some of you are doing this. I won't say who. You're doing this. This is hurting my back, so it must be hurting yours. I'm really turning so that I'm facing towards the knee. It doesn't have to be any more than that. And then you raise the leg. Dragonfly skims the water. Some of you are still turning quite a long way. It is not the case that the bigger movements are better. Remember, hands no higher than your shoulders. And particularly, there's been a break, so go easy with these exercises. You have nothing to prove here. One more time. Lovely. Rubbing your hands together. And once again, tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder. The other side. Part of your chest. And belly. Your legs. And then stand. One of my teachers has an interesting saying, quoting one of his Chinese teachers. He says that small movements are better than big movements, and no movement is better than small movement. No movement really means what's going on in your mind, your intent. So that's the most important thing. After that, the next important thing are doing small movements and then allowing those small movements to build up into the big movements. When we start learning, then actually that's quite difficult to do because you can't see the small movements. But to progress in the art, it doesn't mean that you do the movements bigger and bigger. Actually, one of the things they say in Tai Chi is as you improve, you move less, which is quite interesting. So letting your weight come a little bit forward, letting your hips drop back, sinking down and pushing up. Again, people were talking about doing jigsaws earlier. Imagine if you got one of these big sort of 800 or 1,000 piece jigsaws, got to the end and found there was one piece missing. That would be a blow, wouldn't it? And in a way, it's the same with Tai Chi. Each movement is a collection of small movements. So we have to get into the habit of doing less movement sometimes. Generally speaking, our hands move between our hips and our shoulders. change to the wild goose. That's the norm. And it's unusual for the hand to be stuck out to the sides like this. Normally, if they went out, they would come back in again. That's why it's important here not to move the hands too far, but to really let the elbows drop. You'll feel it very strong in the arms, particularly the upper part of the arms. Remember, your legs are doing the majority of the work. And then heart in the clouds. Here again, they do go high, but not too high. So there's a great economy of movement, but that economy of movement makes us very aware of what is happening within the body, the flow, the movement of energy, however you care to think about it. Good. And shake out. 1 foot forwards. Transferring your weight and just settle in for a moment. Don't go straight into the next movement. Go forwards or backwards, settle in the front or back leg, and then reverse the movement. And in that moment of settling, that's when you go from, again, this rigid position to this. And if you think about it, if you were doing this on a trampoline or a bouncy castle, actually you'd go back and the material of the trampoline would give. And what would happen is you'd go down and then you'd be pushed forwards, and then you'd go down, and then you'd be pushed forwards. And it's got very much that kind of feel, except that I presume the floor you're standing on is fairly firm. So the give isn't in the floor beneath you, but it's actually within your body, particularly in your legs. So the sinking down creates the energy to go to the next movement. It's like riding a bike. When you push a pedal down, that moves the bike, but it also brings the other foot up. So then the other foot is in a position to keep the bike moving. And then on the other side. So the movement is punctuated by these little pauses. Or, no, pause is perhaps the wrong term, but a kind of settling feeling. And those of you who are interested in the more complicated movements, particularly the Tai Chi sequences and things like that, that settling is all important. Otherwise, the movements, the forms become too frantic and we forget movement. But what we want to do is, as is said in one of the old writings in Tai Chi, and whether you're doing the sequences or not, we seek the stillness within the movement. Good. So now we combine the transfer of the weight with this winding movement. I'll show you from the side again. I'm in my back leg. Just simply, my arms are hanging down. All I do is, again, I'll exaggerate here. Can you see? I'll push my chest out. Can you see that? See what my arms are doing? So it shouldn't be that obvious, but there's a little bit of a rotation here. So open here across the chest. I move my weight forwards. I let the rib cage fold in, and that brings my hands to here. From here, going back and forth. This leaves the muscles of your shoulders and your arms free to actually shape the movement. So again, going back to the analogy of riding a bike, your legs move the bike and you steer the bike with your upper body. If you had to somehow pedal with your arms, it would be much harder to steer. And then simply stop rotating the arms. And it does feel a little bit different in the arms, of course, but that same opening and closing in the chest and upper back. Fisherman cast the net. It's a much stronger movement when we do it like this, because it's not just your arms creating the movement. Again, don't let your hands come too high. At the end of the movement, see where my fingers are pointing. Some of you are doing this. It's not that, it's here. Because you're casting the net, you're throwing the net out. You want the net to go that way, not that way. Good. And then on the other side. So start with your arms rotating. And then change to fisherman cast a net. The less you do with your arms, the more subtle the movement, the quieter the movement with your arms, the more you will notice these other changes and the sense of the flow, the energy within the movement. The more effective it will become. Good. And then go back to your chest. Lovely. So what you may find, and I think what you will find, I know I do, is that you're doing this, well, there's hardly anything happening, but you keep practicing like this, and your body gets the idea. It starts to work for you, and you do indeed get more movement, but it isn't this. Yeah, you're casting the net. And one of the things about fishermen cast the net, if you were fishing, I know that I go fishing first, I've never thrown a net out in the sea in my life, but if you threw the net out, you'd be watching it, wouldn't you? You wouldn't sort of throw the net out and be chatting to your mate, because you don't know where it's gone. Yeah, so actually when you cast the net, what you're doing is you're looking out, you're looking into the mid-distance. That's where you want it to go, not up there somewhere. That's no good to you. You want it out where the fish are, out there. So the name carries with it a particular quality. And fisherman cast the net has the sense, they sometimes talk about gazing into the mid-distance. So it has quite an expansive quality to it when we do it properly. But this is not what we're trying to do. So lovely, really nice to get started again, everybody. So coming back to just sitting, thanks for coming. Support from your feet and from your hips, of course, hand down, and then embrace tiger, return to mountain. That lovely feeling once again of settling, and once again finding that sense of stillness within the movement. One more time. And rest. Lovely. Thank you once again, everybody. That was great. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Do take care.
Yes, you too.
Look after